It was just past 7 o'clock a.m. when the fog rolled in over the edge of town, softening everything in sight. The rooftops, the light poles, the rusted bus stop sign that hadn't been replaced in years, and the man beneath it. Raymond Ellis, 85, sat quietly on the narrow bench beside the bus stop, hands resting on top of a worn wooden cane. He wore a faded army green field jacket, the kind that hadn't been issued in decades. The patches on his sleeves were barely legible. On his head was a khaki-colored cap with a flattened airborne insignia. His duffel bag sat at his feet, scuffed and sagging with age. To most, he looked like any other elderly man trying to get somewhere. But Raymond wasn't like most, and he wasn't waiting for just any ride. The sidewalk was busy with people on their way to work or school. A teenage boy nearby scrolled through his phone. A woman in business attire glanced at Raymond, then quickly looked away. A passing jogger barely registered him. He sat still, almost statue-like, except for the way his fingers occasionally rubbed the side of a small, worn envelope tucked in his breast pocket. Inside was a letter and a promise. Raymond had made it 52 years ago, on a battlefield far from home, beside two brothers in arms who hadn't made it back. They had all agreed, if any one of us survives, we return every year for them, so they're not forgotten. This year, he was the last. His legs weren't what they used to be. His back hurt most mornings, and the memorial site was 2 towns away. But Raymond didn't call for help, didn't want attention, didn't expect anyone to remember who he was. He just dressed carefully, packed what he needed, and made his way, alone, to the bus stop at the edge of town, the same way he always had. He looked up briefly as a bus rolled by, but it wasn't the right route. He didn't check the schedule. Instead, his eyes drifted down the empty road again. He wasn't watching for a number on a bus. He was waiting for something else. And though no one else seemed to notice the quiet man in the wrinkled uniform, something was already on its way, something he hadn't asked for, but had always deserved. Raymond Ellis adjusted his coat as the wind picked up slightly, sending a few brittle leaves tumbling past his feet. He didn't shiver. He'd known colder days, in foxholes and foreign jungles. Still, his grip on the cane tightened. The teenage boy sitting down the bench from him glanced sideways and frowned. He shifted uncomfortably, inching his earbuds in deeper. Raymond noticed, but said nothing. Moments later, a silver sedan slowed down in front of the stop. A young man in a pressed shirt leaned out the window toward Raymond. "Hey, Pops, you lost, or just practicing patience?" The man chuckled and drove off before Raymond could reply, if he had even intended to. A young woman nearby on her phone gave him a passing glance. She paused for a split second, as if wondering whether to ask if he needed help, then walked away. It wasn't cruelty, just preoccupation. Everyone had somewhere to be. Raymond didn't blame them. He pulled the envelope from his coat pocket again, eyes scanning the weathered ink for the 100th time. It was a letter written by his best friend, Corporal Joe Wallace, dated May 3rd, 1971, 2 weeks before Joe was killed by mortar fire. "Ray, if I don't make it, you make me a promise. Every year you go, you sit with me and Freddie. You make sure they say our names out loud. That's all. Don't let the world forget us." That was the deal. Raymond had kept that promise for 51 years. This would be the 52nd. But it might also be his last. His legs weren't strong enough to drive. The VFW chapter had shut down. The bus route had changed, and now it required 3 transfers and a long walk uphill to reach the Veterans Memorial. He had told no one, not his daughter, not the neighbors. He didn't want a fuss. He just showed up, sat down, and waited, quietly, the way he always had. But the world didn't wait with him. A group of high schoolers passed by, laughing and tossing a football. One accidentally bumped into Raymond's cane, knocking it askew. "Watch it, Grandpa," one of them muttered, not even turning around. Raymond sighed, reaching slowly to straighten it. It wasn't the disrespect that hurt. It was the forgetting. For a brief moment he wondered whether it was worth trying to get there this year at all. Maybe no one would notice if he didn't show up. Maybe no one would care. But just as the thought flickered across his mind, something changed. A low rumble in the distance, rhythmic, heavy, familiar. Not the whine of buses or the idle of delivery trucks. This was deeper, more purposeful. Raymond's head lifted. The sound grew louder, closer. People began to pause, looking down the road. Then over the hill they appeared, one by one. Military vehicles, dozens of them. Some painted in faded green and tan, others polished to ceremonial shine. Jeeps, Humvees, even 2 classic 5-ton transport trucks. And leading them all was an open-roofed Jeep flying a small American flag that fluttered in the morning breeze. They weren't headed to a parade. They weren't on a mission. They were headed for him. The first military vehicle came to a gentle halt just feet from the bus stop. The open-roofed Jeep led the procession. The man inside, early 40s, square-jawed, in full Army service uniform, ASU, stepped out and walked toward Raymond with deliberate, respectful strides. His boots clicked softly on the pavement. People across the street paused. Drivers leaned out of their windows. The sound of laughter, traffic, and time itself seemed to still. The officer stopped in front of Raymond and saluted. "Sergeant First Class Raymond Ellis," the man said firmly. "Sir, I've been ordered to escort you with full honors." Raymond blinked. "Escort me?" he asked, voice hoarse. "I didn't request anything." The officer lowered his hand and offered a small smile. "No, sir, but the men whose names you read every year did. We've been waiting for this day." From the rest of the convoy, doors opened. Soldiers, some in dress uniforms, others in fatigues, emerged in solemn formation. None of them knew Raymond personally, but they stood at attention like they had trained with him, fought beside him, bled in the same mud. One younger soldier approached carrying a folded flag. Another had a framed black and white photo, the same image Raymond had in his coat. Joe Wallace, Freddie Ramirez, and Raymond, smiling arm in arm, dirt-smudged and 20 years old forever. Raymond tried to rise but struggled. Before he could brace himself, the officer knelt and offered his arm, helping him gently to his feet. The cane wobbled, his hands trembled, but he stood, and as he did, the entire convoy of soldiers saluted in unison. The teenage boy from earlier stared, mouth open. The same woman who had walked past now covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Even the man from the silver sedan, now parked down the street, stepped out and watched silently, his arrogance erased. "We'll get you there, Sergeant," the officer said softly, "and we won't let you walk alone." Raymond nodded slowly. "They're all gone," he said. "I'm the only one left." The officer replied, "Not today, sir." As Raymond stepped toward the jeep, one of the soldiers gently took his duffel. Another opened the side door. Before getting in, Raymond turned back toward the growing crowd. He hesitated. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He saluted them. It wasn't for the attention. It was for those who never got the chance. Cameras were out now. Someone live-streamed the moment. Another student whispered to her friend, "We were going to the mall. We just saw a hero instead." The vehicles roared softly back to life. The convoy moved slowly, ceremonially, down Main Street. Raymond sat upright in the front of the lead jeep, flanked by flags, medals, and men in uniform. Somewhere in his heart, he was 20 again. Somewhere, Joe and Freddie were smiling. By the time the convoy disappeared down Main Street, the bus stop was no longer just a bench. It was a landmark, not because of its paint or its age, but because of what people had just witnessed there. The teenage boy who had looked away earlier was now sitting exactly where Raymond Ellis had been. Only this time, his phone wasn't out. His hands were folded. His eyes were fixed on the road, still watching as if the convoy might return. 2 local reporters arrived within 15 minutes. Photos had already gone viral. The live stream, originally shot by a high school senior, had over 700,000 views by lunchtime. The caption? "He waited alone, but they came for him, because honor remembers." Inside the local coffee shop, someone taped a printed screenshot of the live stream onto the window. It showed Raymond standing beside the officer, mid-salute. Beneath it, in black marker, someone had written, "Respect is not outdated." By late afternoon, the mayor had issued a public statement. "Today, we were reminded that some heroes don't wear capes. They wear old jackets, carry old scars, and sit quietly where no one notices until they do." But Raymond didn't know all that yet. He was standing at the Veterans Memorial 2 towns away, surrounded by the convoy and a dozen other veterans, some from his generation, many from others. Young Marines, active Army, retired officers, all gathered in silence as he stepped forward with that faded photograph in his hand. He knelt slowly, with help, and placed the picture at the base of the monument. 3 names engraved in stone matched the ones in the photo. Joe Wallace, Freddie Ramirez, and Raymond Ellis. Only one was still living, and he had kept his promise. There were no speeches, no music, just the sound of wind, the rustle of leaves, and the unmistakable silence of being seen. One of the younger soldiers, barely 20, approached him afterward, nervous, hands fidgeting at his belt. "Sir, I didn't even know they still did things like this. Convoys and salutes for guys like you." Raymond smiled faintly. "We never expected it. That's the point." The soldier nodded, understanding more than he had before. Back in town, the bench was left empty for the rest of the day. No one sat there. Some people just stopped by to look, to pause. By sunset, someone had left a small flag planted in the dirt beside the bench. A handwritten note attached read, "He waited for a bus, but what arrived was dignity." That evening, as the sky turned orange and the last of the convoy returned Raymond home, something had shifted, not just in him, but in the town itself. The jeep pulled up quietly to his modest house, where the porch light flickered and the railing leaned slightly to the left. The officer helped him down. Raymond's legs trembled, but his heart was still strong. As he reached the steps, he turned back. The officer gave one final salute, and then, like the convoy itself, he was gone. Raymond stepped inside, hung his coat on the same hook it had rested on for decades, and placed the letter from Joe Wallace back into its envelope. He didn't need to open it again. The promise had been honored. Later that night, a knock came at the door. It was the teenage boy from the bus stop. He stood awkwardly, holding a paper bag. "I thought you might want dinner. My mom makes a mean beef stew." Raymond took the bag and smiled. "You don't have to, son." "I know," the boy replied. "That's why I did." They sat on the porch for a while, saying very little. Sometimes silence was enough. In the days that followed, the bench at the bus stop was cleaned and painted. A plaque was installed beside it that read, "In honor of all who waited quietly and all who remembered loudly." Local schools played the video as part of Veterans Day programs. Students wrote letters. Some even volunteered at the local VA clinic. And as for Raymond Ellis, he didn't become famous. He didn't need to. But every year afterward, he didn't sit alone.
If this story touched your heart, we'd be honored to have you with us. Each day we share quiet moments that remind us what still matters. You can subscribe below to join us.